"Excuse me," Elishnish said in the clearest and most pleasant tone she could muster.
"How does one acquire
coins?" The dubious expression on the female's face, which had formed while Elishnish was preparing herself to speak, grew even more so after she asked the question. Elishnish grew uncertain. She didn't think it was an unreasonable thing to ask. Maybe humans, dwarves and quagga were more different than she had initially believed.
"You work," the human finally replied. "This work again."
Why was everything described as work? The frost dragons sent their quagga slaves to do work, but they never went about treating it as anything other than toil for slaves and tribute for dragons. The vampire brides always treated it as something to be proud and happy about, but Elishnish did not understand why anyone should be proud or happy to be a slave. Now, before her, was a human who looked very much in the position of a slave, going on about work, except now it had something to do with acquiring coins.
"What does this work entail?" Elishnish asked.
Labor?
You can sell stuff too."
The human eyed her up and down. "Though, with your looks, I bet you could manage a lot more than that." At what she thought was a compliment, Elishnish puffed out her chest proudly, but then the female frowned. Her voice faltered at the human's darkening expression. Why did she look so displeased? "How does one acquire this work?" "Well, if you have a trade," the human answered, "you'll need to register at the right guild first." Elishnish furrowed her brow. Nothing about that made any sense. "That's too complicated for now. What about the work that you've already acquired?" The human looked down at the crates, eyeing them balefully. "I need to move these to a warehouse in another part of the city by the end of today," she said, towing the nearest one lightly. "So, delivery? I suppose you could call it that." "Excellent." Elishnish brightened. "This delivery is a trade that I've recently acquired. Where might I find the delivery guild, that I may acquire coins work?" "There's no delivery guild," the human scowled. "Are you some rich girl making fun of us poor folk?" "No," Elishnish replied sadly, turning her gaze down to the cobblestones of the plaza. "I've become poor myself, recently." "Oh. Sorry." "How kind of you to say so." Elishnish was touched. "I will see what this work of yours entails. I'll understand once I've seen it." The female glanced over her again. "Why did everyone keep doing that?" "I don't think someone as pretty as you needs to do something like this," she said. "You'll ruin your hands, too." Elishnish pondered the human female's words. By all appearances, she was pitifully weak in comparison to a dragon. The idea that Elishnish could be injured by any of her work was laughable indeed. "Nonsense," she scoffed. "If you can do it, then so can I. Go about your work. I promise that I'll pay careful attention." "That's not what I meant." Whatever, I'm falling behind here. Just please don't get in the way or break anything." Elishnish received one last, suspicious look before the female turned back to the crates. She withdrew a long, ragged cloth, using it to wrap one of her hands. Another cloth followed to bind the other. Slowly working one of the crates from the pile, the human let out a small grunt as she lifted it. Elishnish stepped from one side to the other, noting every detail. I see," she said, nodding to herself. "What now?" "Then, I carry this crate to the warehouse," the human said in a strained voice as she shifted her burden around. "Just one? Does it look like I can carry more? I'll return for the others later." "They won't be stolen?" "Of course not. Thieves'll get dragged off by the Death Knights to God's knows where." "I see," Elishnish said. "Very well, human. Show me more." The female shook her head as she shuffled away, muttering something with a meaning Elishnish was uncertain of. She followed the human and her crate before arriving at a large, hollow building constructed from thin lengths of wood. A human male standing near its wide entrance eyed the two as they approached. "You're slowing down, girl," he grumbled. "I don't send you out to chatter with your friends." "That's not. You keep at it like this and I'm docking your pay." Elishnish observed their exchange, noting familiar methods in the male's manner. It was similar to how Olisar Dark had often dealt with the Quagga, searching for faults in their bargains in order to renege on his obligations or impose new terms upon standing agreements. The male was much larger than the female, so the female would be hard-pressed to challenge his authority.
The female said nothing, but Elishnish sensed that she now nursed a grudge for the interaction. Perhaps, in the future, the female would grow larger and kill this male, taking over his warehouse. Then she would be the one with authority and harry smaller humans with her demands. Elishnish nodded in satisfaction at finally being able to draw a sensible comparison in this bewildering place. The female stomped off, and Elishnish followed. Back at the pile of crates in the crowded plaza, the human glared up at her. "Why are you still following me?" she said in annoyed tones. "I'm already in enough trouble as it is." "Because you're still doing your work, yes?" Elishnish replied. "I promised you that I would pay careful attention." "So you're going to be following me all day? I don't understand, just what is so interesting about moving crates around?" "I don't think it's very interesting, actually." 4. The human turned away and took several deep breaths as she prepared to pick up the next crate. She leaned over to grasp one, then stopped halfway as Elishnish spoke again. "Say," Elishnish said. "Must you carry them one at a time?" "It's not like I can carry more," she replied. Elishnish looked around, then pointed to a wagon nearby. "Why not use one of those?" she asked. The human unbent herself and turned to look in the direction indicated. "I don't own a wagon," the human answered. "They're expensive, and it's not as if I can pull one by myself. Even hand carts are expensive." "Then your work is not carrying crates one at a time to that building?" "No. I just have to move them over." "Ugh, why am I wasting my time answering you?" She turned back to the task at hand, lifting the next crate with the same, strained, expression. "I do not wish to follow you around doing this for the entire day." Elishnish stepped forward, "So allow me to speed things along. Like I said, you'll ruin your pretty hands if you—" The female's voice trailed off as the crate she was struggling to shift around was lifted out of her hands. Her mouth gaped as it disappeared into Elishnish's bag, which was slung over her shoulder and rested against her hip. One by one, the entire pile of crates on the ground disappeared as Elishnish grasped them lightly in one hand to place into the bag held open with the other. When the space on the plaza floor was cleared, she turned to face the human girl. "Is that everything?" Yes. "Good. Let us work." She strode off, and the female trailed after her. When they reached the street leading out of the plaza, Elishnish took a turn into a lonely, shadowed alley. The girl spoke up in alarm. Wait, that's not the right way." "It is, though." "Are you trying to steal everything?" The human's voice rose. "I'll call for a death knight." "Don't be silly," Elishnish said over her shoulder. "I do not wish to steal anything, because I have no desire to fight all the things that will chase after me. Your line of thought leads nowhere sensical." The human's mouth hung open silently mid-shout and her face screwed up in confusion at Elishnish's reply. She picked up her pace, following Elishnish as she navigated the dark and narrow alleyways. Several minutes later, the warehouse was in clear view. "I thought you didn't know where to go," the female muttered. "I didn't," Elishnish replied. "That's why I asked you to show me. After that, I knew where this warehouse you were referring to was, so I knew where to go." "Then you're not new to the city?" the human asked. "You don't look like you're from anywhere I know of." "I am new here, actually," Elishnish answered. "My family recently arrived from the north." "It must be really far north, then. Everything about you makes me think of cold things. You do seem to know your way around, though. I've lived here all my life and I didn't know about that shortcut, not that I'd ever try it by myself." "It only took an hour or so to see all the city's paths on the surface," Elishnish said. "This much is natural, no?" "If you say so." "Wait, what did you mean by the surface?" "There's more below, yes?" "I guess." "It's as I've thought," Elishnish nodded. "All of the cities I've visited so far are mostly underground. This is my first day exploring Irantal, but I do plan on seeing the rest whenever I have the chance." The same male was waiting in front of the warehouse when they arrived. His face set into a deep frown after he looked them over. "I don't see anything," he said. "You quitting?" We didn't quit," the human female said. "Just one moment." The female shot her a look. "All of them?" Elishnish asked. "Yes, all of them," she hissed. 23 crates,
neatly organized into a pyramid, occupied the space in front of the warehouse. A few moments later, the male had long risen from his seat to inspect them. After a few minutes, he shook his head and disappeared into the building.
"Did we win?" Ilishnish asked. "What?" the girl answered in a puzzled voice.
Before the female could come up with a proper response, the male reappeared. The girl held out her palm, and he deposited 1 silver coin, followed by 4 copper ones. Ilishnish looked over her shoulder and frowned down at the meager quantity. "Did he dock your pay?"
Ilishnish asked.
No, the girl answered. "This is what I was offered for the job. If he was willing to reduce your reward for being slow, doesn't that mean he should increase it for being fast?"
The two of them looked up at the warehouse male.
2 more copper coins clinked against the others in the girl's hand.
"Only because we got the space on the caravan going out at noon," he said. "This wasn't supposed to be a courier job or anything."
The man turned away, shouting into the warehouse for someone. The girl turned and walked back in the direction they had come from, a happy little smile on her face. Having had nearly all of her possessions stripped away recently, Ilishnish thought she could understand how one could be so pleased with obtaining such a pittance of treasure.
"What will you do now?"
Ilishnish asked after she caught up and settled in to walk beside the female.
"I should pay you back for your help. Let's head back to the main plaza."
They returned using the shortcut Ilishnish had used. The plaza was even more crowded than before. "It's about lunchtime," the female said, looking around the throng of people baking in the sun. "I can treat you to something if you'd like."
"What do they offer for lunchtime?"
"Light meals for the people in the market and all the shops around here, usually." She pointed to a stand where meat was being placed over a fire. "The skewers are fast and good, usually."
Ilishnish studied the selection from where they stood.
The portions were pitifully small. The frost dragons were allowed to hunt for their food in Tob Forest and throughout the ranges of the Azalazia Mountains. She could get far more for little effort.
"I prefer cold food, frozen would be ideal," she said.
"Is there something like that here?" "Cold? It's not really a meal, but they do have ice cream." The human led her through several rows of stands to wait at the end of a long line.
"It's quite popular," she said as they settled in to wait, "but expensive. I've only had it once myself."
"What do you do with your coins, then?" "I'm saving up," the girl replied. "Mages are in really high demand nowadays. One day I'll have enough to learn magic." "Are you a magic caster as well?"
"I haven't seen a magic item like the one you have."
"I can use magic, yes," Ilishnish said. "I believe your people would refer to me as a bard."
"Oh," the female exclaimed,
striking a fist in her palm, "it all makes sense now. You're so beautiful, enough to easily attract attention wherever you go. The way you carry yourself is full of charm, too. Even that miser of a warehouse manager was so easily swayed. I should have known." "I don't think I did anything special."
We appear to be next."
They looked down at the stand. There were 5 barrels of different colors, each radiating an enchanted chill.
"Welcome, what flavor would you like?"
the human awaiting them said. "Is there something meaty?" Ilishnish asked.
I can't say that there is," she replied.
"How about Hyuri? It's got a refreshing flavor."
"I'll give it a try."
After receiving 3 copper coins from the girl, the female manning the stand handed her some sort of object wrapped in paper. Ilishnish peered at the small, yellowish sphere that rested on top. Doubts arose over the appearance of the ice cream. Being frozen and yellow was a distasteful combination.
"Let's head over to the fountain."
The girl handed the ice cream over to Ilishnish. "You can enjoy your treat there without anyone bumping into you." Ilishnish licked the yellow sphere gingerly, making a face as she rolled the flavor around in her mouth.
"You're not having this ice cream?"
"No," the girl shook her head. "I need to save up as much as I can so I can start learning magic as soon as possible. I don't want to do this sort of menial labor forever. Mages get paid a lot more." "What work will you do as a mage?" I don't even know if I can use magic at all, yet, but if I can I suppose I'll be conjuring spices or paper or something like that to start out with. If I get better at it, I could afford to learn enchanting. That's where the real coin is." "What about you?" "I can't actually imagine someone like you being poor. A bard with your looks would surely earn plenty." "I would?
What sort of work would this be?"
You're a bard, so you can perform, right? The girl asked. You have a pleasant voice, too, so you must be a good singer. I can sing, Ilishnish admitted, but I only know dwarf songs, mostly. Oh, that's what you meant by up north. The girl seemed to think for a moment. Strange, I didn't think any humans lived with the dwarves. Do you play any instruments? I have a drum. I guess you sing while playing it. Well, dwarves are starting to show up here, so maybe there'll be enough to earn decent coin from soon. Most of the ones I've seen are merchant types, and they seem to love frequenting the taverns. How about adventuring? You're way stronger than you look. Adventuring? Ilishnish shifted uncomfortably. Yes, they've been recruiting like crazy, trying to find talented people. She pointed at a building not far away. Their guild hall is that one right there, between the cathedral and the magician guild. Ilishnish stepped around to the other side of the female, putting the human between herself and the adventurer nest. Aren't adventurers dangerous? She said in hushed tones. Dangerous? If you mean what they do, then yes, I suppose so. I just thought that since you're so strong you'd do well there. They tried getting me to join too, offered to pay for my learning magic and everything, but once you're in, you're a government worker with no say over what you're going to do. Most people can't stomach the danger that comes with adventuring. That is a wise choice, Ilishnish nodded. Danger should be avoided. The food was somewhat pleasing in temperature, but she had no taste for sweet things. There was wild fruit and honey during the brief summers in the mountains, but the food that crossed her palate was from prey which she hunted down herself. As she suspected, a meatier flavor would have been superior. This ice cream is interesting, she said after she finished the crunchy remains of what had held it. I will investigate other flavors later. I'm glad you liked it, the human said. Here's the rest of your share. She fished out a handful of coins from her purse and offered them to Ilishnish. It was an unexpected gesture. Valuables should not be so easily relinquished, after all. Ilishnish held out her hand, and 8 copper coins were deposited into her palm. Several calculations ran through her mind as she peered at the slightly tarnished pieces of metal. What will you do now? Ilishnish asked. Well, that shipment was supposed to take me all day, the girl answered. I'll see if I can find some other job for the rest of it. More work? Yes, I can't let the opportunity slip by. The sooner I start learning magic, the sooner I can start earning a decent living. I will come with you, Ilishnish declared. Why you will? I thought you didn't find it interesting. I don't, Ilishnish agreed, but you'll divide your pay with me if I come and work with you, yes? Well, yes, of course, the girl replied. If you're coming along, I should find jobs that are worth our time. It's possible to work for more? The city is so busy right now that they're short on wagons for everything. Hundreds of soul eaters were moved north for something going on in the dwarf kingdom, and they took as many wagons along with them. The ones left here have been fully hired out to move things around, but it's still not enough. The demand isn't as high as it was during the grand opening of the city, but all the local transport companies are still working on clearing up the backlog. With little reference to what she was talking about, the words came out as a meaningless jumble to Ilishnish. She would review their conversation at a later point after she had learned more about human society. For the time being, all that she understood was that the shortage created work, which could be exploited for personal gain. Show me this work, she said. Standing around profits us nothing. Right, the human looked around before turning back to speak again. If you're ready to go, I guess we should be off. She wiped her hand on the cloth apron over her belt and held it out towards Ilishnish. I'm Pam, by the way. Pleased to meet you. Pam? It seemed remarkably short and meaningless, even for a human. Perhaps using an alias was a common practice amongst their kind, or maybe humans were just unfortunate and meaningless beings in general. Just Pam? Ilishnish asked. Just Pam, the girl answered. I never knew my parents, so that's all that I have. The rationale was absurd. Why did one need parents for a name? Barring her father's enclave, frost dragons were more likely to lay their clutches on a glacier or iceberg somewhere and leave their wimlings to fend for themselves than raise them personally. Names were the essence of self. The idea that one wouldn't naturally know their own identity was preposterous. Though, she supposed that it would be safer to use an alias. Since the people here appeared to do so readily, using one herself should not draw suspicion. Looking down at Pam's outstretched hand, she reached out to grasp it lightly before answering. "You may call me Shiva," Ilishnish said. "It's a pleasure to meet you as well." Evening fell over Erantle, and Pam appeared to be in an incredibly good mood. Her humming as they made their way through the city seemed to be incredibly off-key as well. "What's this tune you are humming, Pam?" Ilishnish asked the girl leading her along. "Oh, it must sound awful to you. I am unfamiliar with the local music, but it certainly seems so." "Gay, that bad, huh?" Pam winced. "It's supposed to be a little hymn, but it's not surprising that you don't know it, living with the dwarves and all." "Indeed, I know nothing of these southern gods," Ilishnish nodded. "The dwarves primarily worship their earth god. The high priest even has a place in their ruling council." "Their earth god? I wonder if they're the same." "Anyways, the temples are just the temples here. They got nothing to do with the king. I recently switched over to the Six, that's where I picked up that hymn from." "You switched over?" Ilishnish furrowed her brow. "Won't the gods you switched from have a problem with that? Surely there must be some sort of penalty for leaving?" I haven't heard of any problems. Besides, the Four are a part of the Six, so there's a lot of things that are familiar. The staff at the temple treats converts like long-lost family. It's actually really nice, especially for someone like me. More importantly than that, it was better to have 6 than 4. Why would anyone settle for less, when they could have more?" They returned to the main plaza of the city, joining a long queue of people. They ranged in all shapes and sizes, from girls like Pam to large and portly males who reminded Ilishnish of Hegenmil. Her mouth watered. If she encountered such humans in the mountains, where the frost dragons were allowed to hunt for food, would she be allowed to snack on a few? During her time delivering things back and forth between the dwarf cities, she had been instructed not to prey on the lives and property of the dwarves, but nothing was mentioned about humans. There were no complaints about killing the frost giants, either. "What are we doing back here?" Ilishnish asked to distract herself from her hunger. "Just lining up to collect our pay." Pam fished out a pile of crumpled and dingy papers from her pouch. "These are all the completed orders from our work today. We'll submit them to the people at the Merchant Guild, who'll process them and give us our coin." "Will it really work that way?" Ilishnish sensed there was nothing special about what was in Pam's hand. "These are just pieces of parchment with little value." "The dwarves don't have a merchant guild?" the girl asked. "Based on what you've said," Ilishnish answered, "their merchant guild isn't quite the same and it isn't what it used to be. Maybe that will change soon, but it was not much of anything when I left." "Oh. Well, each page here is an order, signed and sealed by the shops we carried out deliveries for. The paper itself is cheap stuff, but what matters is that it confirms that we did all that work. The guild'll see everything written here and transfer the coin to us through their member accounts." Ilishnish frowned. As often was the case throughout the day, she couldn't understand any of what the excited girl had said. Reaching out, she took one of the slips of paper and held it out in front of her. There were words and numbers, but such things were as uncertain as the relationship between the powerful and the powerless. "Are you sure about this? There wouldn't be this giant line if it didn't work that way, you'll see." The line shifted forward as the sun disappeared behind the city walls, and the evening crowds appeared. They carried with them an entirely different atmosphere, unlike the orderly feeling that daytime in Erantle brought. Pam shivered and looked around nervously. "What's wrong?" "I don't like being out at night." "Why is that?" "Just an old story, I guess." Pam edged closer to her. "Bad things can easily happen to a lone girl at night." "Well, I guess with the new king it's not like that anymore, but still, you don't ever feel like that?" "I guess not, seeing how strong you are, but all the looks you get from everyone would still make me uncomfortable." "Actually, what am I talking about? You're a bard, of course you'd want everyone's attention." Pam let out a nervous laugh after her rambling thread and settled into squirming silence. Ilishnish peered at her curiously. Weaker species often banded together for protection, so it seemed odd to have such fears in Erantle where many humans dwelled. "It's rare to see humans on their own," she told her reassuringly. "I can't imagine that it's possible to be alone in a city like this. There are always dozens more close by." Confusion spread over Pam's face as Elishnish replied.
That's,
what I meant was, is that a dwarf thing?
Perhaps, Elishnish pondered her question.
Dwarf cities are far more populous. These surface dwellings are spread out over a large area, but most of them aren't very tall or sturdy. Dwarves build their cities underground, and a single structure in their capital may be built to span between the floor and ceiling of a cavern and beyond. This results in space for far more people using the same area of land that one of the buildings here might occupy. I haven't seen anything similar on the surface so far, but surely such construction must exist elsewhere.
I can't imagine that, Pam replied as they shifted forward again.
The city's outer wall is the biggest building I've ever seen, and it doesn't seem all that big after seeing those dragons perched on it. Especially those 3 huge ones that are almost twice as long as the walls are tall. Then there's that funny one that looks like a sausage with wings. People were screaming that the wall would collapse when he walked by overhead at first.
Most of them went somewhere last month, but you still must have seen the ones that come in and out once in a while.
I've seen them before, yes,
Elishnish replied absently as she continued to observe the plaza. They all come from the Azalisia Mountains north of here.
There was once an even bigger one than those 3 you mentioned, but he's not around anymore.
Pam's eyes grew wide at her words. That's amazing.
What does a dragon that big even eat?
Meat?
Elishnish wasn't sure what else she thought they would eat. There are plenty of large things in the mountains to feed on, as well as beings that can defeat the frost dragons that you occasionally see flying around here.
That can't be true, can it?
Pam frowned.
How big does everything get? Big enough.
Even herd animals like Nook can grow to be as heavy as a new adult frost dragon,
and they're quite common.
Aside from a few things I've only really read about, the most dangerous are actually the frost giants.
Pam swallowed and leaned forward.
They're more dangerous than frost dragons? She nearly whispered.
They can be, Elishnish admitted.
They are varied in strength, much like your own people, but they are giants, mighty in stature and fierce combatants all. Murmurs rose in the air around them. A man in bright colors selling snacks and refreshments went around, stopping occasionally to exchange his wares for coin.
A dwarf I talked to said that they're nothing but savages, a woman called out from the side. Living in tribes with no craft or magic.
The dwarves live under the mountains,
Elishnish shrugged, and they have been refugees
since the time of the demon gods. It has been all they could do to hold together their traditions and retain what remained of their histories as they struggled for centuries to survive. They have only recently returned to their old holdings through the power of the sorcerer king, Ainzulgaun. As such, I would not rely on any dwarf for an accurate telling of what goes on beyond the holes that they have hidden themselves in for so long.
But at least the dwarves are from the Azalisia Mountains, a man to the side said. How would you know more than they?
Elishnish turned to the source of the voice, eyeing him coolly. The man's eyes wavered and he swallowed audibly. The others near him that she faced quieted and shifted silently under her gaze. Beside her, Pam's lips were parted, her eyes shining with expectation. Perhaps it was a good time to test the girl's assertion about her potential as a performer. Elishnish's mind turned to Hegemil's description of human bards as well, and her lips turned up in a slight smile as she stepped out from the line and turned gracefully to face her audience. Because it is my home, she told them. I was born there, and I have traveled its length and breadth, from the verdant foothills of the great forest of Tob to the icy seas of the north far beyond the shores of Riastais and Baharuth. Through the high passes and the deepest valleys under towering peaks I have been, overflowing glaciers and bubbling springs. Of the Azalisia Mountains, of the timeless crown of winter, no one knows more of than I. Her arms moved and her body swayed lightly in the soft magical light of the plaza as she drew more and more people in around her with a voice of crystalline purity that carried over the air nearby. In a corner of her mind, her timid frost dragon nature demanded that she cringe away from all the attention, to flee and find somewhere safe to hide. She could ignore it, however, for she felt excitement course through her body over the reckless gambit, a test of all of her knowledge and experiences to harness something she had only read of before in old and dusty dwarven texts. She felt the threads of power weave their way around her. They were not of arcane sorcery that dragons wielded innately and mortals struggled to learn, nor did they bear the hallmarks of devout faith. It was the power of a single voice, a single will that could fascinate, inspire and seize the hearts and minds of all who fell prey to the enchantment it wove over them. It could earn her great renown and, most importantly, it could possibly earn her more than 12 gold coins. Actually, she would count it as a success if she even got one. Then what do you know about them? A man's coarse voice snapped her out of bargaining herself down even further. What are these frost giants? Ilishnish latched onto the question, favoring the participant with a brilliant smile. He blushed, letting out a flustered cough into his hand, and Ilishnish settled into a low, but clear voice that compelled those around her to lean forward and listen. There is a war that has been fought since ancient times, older than Reistais, older than the demon gods. Before the dwarves founded their cities beneath the mountains, this war had raged across the peaks of Azalisia's icy ranges, over glacier, moor and vale. In ages past, lost to the veil of time, two mighty races came over the frigid and callous seas to arrive on the northern shores, where the mountains meet the waves. First came the great worms of old, the ancestors of the frost dragons of today. They saw the high peaks and abundant valleys, the vast fields of ice and pristine skies. It was a paradise for their kind, and so they deposited their eggs throughout the mountains and moved on with the hope that their unborn children would eventually hatch and grow and thrive in this new home. And hatch they did. Long after their parents had gone, these wimlings made their homes, grew and danced in the skies above the mountains. This peaceful and happy time was not to last, however, for over that same icy sea came the dark longships of the frost giant clans. At first, the frost dragons saw these newcomers as a curiosity, but it was not long until their savage nature was made clear. Once they fortified their holdings, they struck out against the denizens of the Azalisia Mountains in their lust for violence and conquest. Animals, monsters, all the races that dwelled around them, even the young dragons were not spared from their atrocities. As she launched into her tale, she felt her hold over the crowd solidify. The voices around her stilled as they gave her more of their attention, but she still needed those who would volunteer to ask questions that the people must have, to direct the flow of her words in the ways which piqued their interest. She paused in her tale and, surely enough, a question came into the silence. That can't be right. The skeptical voice came from a middle-aged merchant who looked like he was doing well for himself. Only the strongest adventurers can defeat a dragon. Even those tales, I'm not so sure about anymore. We've all seen the frost dragons flying over the city. How can anything defeat one, never mind so many? Because like all living things, Ilishnish replied, dragons are born, and must grow. Tell me, good sir, how many years must a human child experience before you consider them a proper adult? For the common folk, 14, 16, at most, the merchant replied. Nobles are different, might be a few years more before they're considered ready for their responsibilities. And who is the oldest human you know? The merchant furrowed his brow as he thought on her question. Around 86. Haven't seen her around for a while, though. She might have passed on without my knowing. 16, Ilishnish repeated his words, and 86, for a human to become an adult, and to reach the end of one's years. In the span of time it takes for a human to be born, grow old and pass away, a dragon would still be considered a child. It takes a full century for a dragon to grow to adulthood. The largest of the dragons you've seen flying over the city have taken nearly 4 centuries to become what they are today. When the frost giant onslaught began, they did not strike out against powerful elder and ancient dragons. They enslaved and slaughtered children who were still learning how to hunt and speak, who had yet to love and learn of the wide world beyond their quiet and reclusive lives. For centuries this conflict echoed over the mountains and, by the time the demon gods came and went, only a handful of frost dragons remained. They are the brood mothers that you see flying in the skies above the sorceress kingdom today. With their age and centuries of living came strength and wisdom enough to band together to resist their enemies, to claim a place to safely raise children of their own. Still though, someone said, seems like a young dragon would be plenty powerful, unless you're saying they suddenly grow all huge like that. You are correct in this, of course, Ilishnish admitted with a gentle nod, but what you are not accounting for is the frost giants themselves. Imagine a human, powerfully built, with skin as pale and blue as the winter skies. Imagine that he is not your size, instead towering above, nearly to the battlements of Erantal's outer walls. In these lowlands, where the most one sees a giant kin like trolls and ogres, perhaps the occasional hill giant, one may believe frost giants slow and stupid,
but they are not. Because they live in tribes, you may believe them to be primitive and unsophisticated, but this is also untrue. Frost giants are as intelligent and wise as humans and dwarves, and they can indeed craft and build. Their tribal holdings are not meager tents and hovels, they are dread citadels of ancient ice and stone, entrenched in the shadows of the towering peaks above and shrouded in icy mists. From these seats of power comes order through raw might, a society of cold laws evolved from ancient and savage traditions, where mighty jarls are seated over councils filled with powerful champions and priests. Unlike humans and dwarves, however, the average frost giant is more comparable to an adventurer in vocation. Among their number, cunning and tireless rangers, leading howling packs of winter wolves, potents and giant eagles, it is even rumored that several defeated frost dragons have become their pets. Every tribe has priests and shamans who can bring forth vicious magical assaults, mighty elementals, and lay dreadful curses and other afflictions upon their victims. Worst of all are their terrifying warriors, berserkers, weapon masters and blackguards clad in grim plates of metal, wielding weapons of wrought ice bound with such powerful enchantments that they can shatter your city gates with a single blow and turn the very magics that frost giants are vulnerable to aside. Many of the men and women around them swallowed at her account, faces turned cold and ashen in the warm spring evening. A short woman in colorful silken finery raised another question. "Many of us merchants have been looking forward to trade with the dwarves," she asked. "If these frost giants are as powerful as you say, what risks does this pose for our business? Will they attack our caravans?" "I have little doubt that they will," Ilishnish answered. "It is their way, so it is merely a matter of when. Already, their scouts have been drawn to the stirrings of the dwarven realm, watching, waiting, gauging the strength of travelers and planning the best times to strike. The frost giants are savage and powerful, but they are not fools. When the time comes, your only warning will be the blare of distant war horns, the thunder of spells and the shuddering quake of giant boots over the passes. Should we hire out undead bodyguards from the sorceress kingdom, then?" It was another voice, from another part of the crowd. More and more questions came, as expressions turned calculating to profit and loss. The frost giants have their own values, their own way of measuring the world around them. They are merciless raiders with hearts of ice, seeking glory and treasure and foes to challenge and boast about to their peers. Placing a death knight before a frost giant may simply encourage them to attack what they see as a test of strength. Win or lose, your wagons of precious merchandise will most likely not remain intact in the aftermath of such a confrontation. Then, what can we do? If the Sorcerer's Kingdom's forces will not dissuade them, how else can we conduct our trade in safety? Of that, I cannot be certain. Ilishnish shook her head. Once, it was the frost dragons that kept the frost giants in check, with their ancient enemies now subjugated by the Sorcerer King. The frost giants of the Azalizia Mountains will be free to expand and grow. It is not only the mountains that are vulnerable to this threat. Eventually, they will look to the foothills and lowlands below to raid, and return to their great longships to wreak havoc against the coasts of the northern seas. Should we ask the Sorceress Kingdom to send the dragons against them? That would only mean a continuation of the ancient war to no gain, Ilishnish replied. Again, I tell you, sending exactly what the frost giants seek will only embolden them all the more. Death is no deterrent, for dying in combat to foes most worthy is to each their greatest desire, to prove themselves so that they may join their forefathers in the great hall of their afterlife. They seek conflict, revel in warfare and welcome death in glorious violence. That has to be an exaggeration, another merchant spoke from the crowd. No race would be so utterly insane. This is merely a minstrel's tale. A minstrel I may be, Ilishnish smirked, but what I have shared is also the truth. On your safe roads in the pastoral lowlands, you do not know of the harsh realities of the wide world. You think that the weak monsters and demi-humans of these soft lands are strong. Think again. They are as nothing to wise dragons and mighty giants, to great leviathans in the deep and eldritch horrors that lurk in the dark and forgotten places. The world is vast, and these human nations here are merely a tiny part of it. I would have thought that, with the advent of the Sorcerer King, this truth would have long dawned upon the peoples here. A low murmur filled the air around them as the crowd discussed what they had heard. Ilishnish sensed several individuals muscling through the crowd, so she returned to stand in line with Pam at the top of the stairs. A moment later, a grizzled militia veteran appeared from out of the throng of people, accompanied by his men.
"Hey, what's going on here?" he said. "Break up this mess, you're blocking off the stairs to the Merchant Guild." Upon finding the space in the center of the crowd empty, the man's eyes scanned the spectators until they stopped at Ilishnish. "Hey, you."
"Me?" Ilishnish replied innocently.
"Who else could I be talking to?" The man scowled. "What do you think you're doing, obstructing business?" "Well, we're a part of this queue, why else would we be here?" Pam held up her fistful of delivery orders, and the sour-faced human eyed the pair suspiciously. Before he could utter another word, the line advanced again, and they disappeared into the doors of the Merchant Guild. Seated in the darkness of a small room in the Great Tomb of Nazarick, a figure worked without pause before a small desk.
"This form goes here, this field is from this table."
A pale hand stretched out and withdrew a thick binder from a row arrayed at the edge of the workspace. The binder was opened to the appropriate page, and a finger traced the table laid upon it. Crimson eyes narrowed in concentration as a pen whirled absently in the free hand. F3, C5.
The hand reached out again for another binder.
The activity continued, the silence of the pitch-black room interrupted occasionally by soft muttering, the rustling of crisp parchment, and the scratching of the pen. Without the sound of breath or even a heartbeat within, one might have mistaken it for a crypt where a lich conducted its studies, but, if light were shed on the scene, the opinion of the observer would take a complete turn. Rather than an old stone office filled with dry tomes coated by the dust of ages, it was a room that a human in the surrounding nations might have thought belonged to the daughter or a count or a wealthy baron. Creamy pastel wallpaper covered the walls, and a rich carpet was laid over the cold stone floor. The room was furnished with tall wardrobes, a small desk and a modestly sized four-poster bed. Within the translucent veil of the bed's canopy, upon the scented silk sheets and the fluffy pillows lay the supreme overlord of Nazarick, Ainzul Gown. Well, a plush version of him, anyway. It had cost her much to have Albedo make one. Frowning down at her piles of paperwork, Shiltir Bloodfallen made a tired noise. The undead did not suffer from physical exhaustion, but stress and mental strain would still add up. The work was something she could have delegated to her vampire brides, but she had imposed a portion of it on herself in order to become intimately familiar with the transportation network she had been charged with creating. She looked at the pile of completed documents on the right corner of the desk, the product of 12 hours of work. Ein Summer would surely appreciate her efforts. Her master had also instructed all of the guardians to take regular breaks, so she rose from her seat. She stretched her arms above her head, feeling her crimson silk camisole slide over her skin as she went over to her bed. Throwing herself onto its luxurious covers, she reached out to lovingly pull the plush figure to her breast. "Ah, Ein Summer, lend me some of your magnificent energy." She turned her head down to press her lips to the doll's head, but a familiar scent rose to meet her gentle kiss. Shiltir looked back up with an annoyed look, even as she squeezed the doll tightly to herself. As much as it had cost her, she had been surprised that Albedo was willing to make it for her at all. The request was initially for a body pillow, but the Guardian Overseer refused in no uncertain terms. Obtaining the doll had taken weeks, and it was only after she had returned happily to her bedroom to partake of her new acquisition that she understood what the Guardian Overseer had done. No matter how many times she had washed it, Albedo's scent remained infused in the doll. Shiltir was being mocked. It was as if Albedo was declaring to Shiltir that Ein Summer was already marked as hers. She hated that the doll carried Albedo's scent, but she refused to let go of Ein Summer, so she was caught between the two feelings whenever she embraced her beloved. Shiltir wriggled under her covers, pressing the doll to her under the sheets. It was the best compromise she could come up with, but, in the end, her bedsheets would end up being laced with Albedo's scent and her attendants would have to do something about it. "I'll get that bitch back for this someday," she consoled herself as she closed her eyes and settled down to rest after a long week of work. Undead did not need to sleep, but rest was rest. With so many of her vampire brides otherwise occupied, it was a simple alternative for quickly relieving mental fatigue. A few hours was much more effective than meditation, not that she had the patience for that, or slowly recovering while performing less arduous tasks. Shiltir sighed as she snuggled with her Ein Summer doll, conjuring pleasant thoughts to accompany her. Shiltir. This timing, is she using something to scry me? It wasn't possible, of course. Nazarick had been warded tightly against such magic within an hour of its appearance in this strange new world.
Yes, what is it, aren't you?
We're convening for an emergency meeting. Be in the throne room once you've made yourself decent.
Emergency? Did someone declare war on us?
If only it were so simple. The available information will be disclosed once everyone has assembled. The message cut off abruptly, in absence of any pleasantries. Really, she was a gorilla through and through. Giving the doll one last, affectionate squeeze, she threw back her covers and swung her legs off of the edge of the bed. Outside of her room, a vampire bride greeted her as the door opened. She bowed low as she greeted Shaltia, and her full breasts strained against the diaphanous fabrics of her alabaster dress.
Thank you for your hard work, Shaltia Summer.
Shaltia's lips turned up at the enticing sight, and her hand stretched out to trace the line of a vampire bride's jaw. There's to be a meeting in the throne room, Shaltia told her as she tipped her attendant's chin up to face her. Make the appropriate preparations.
Yes, Shaltia Summer.
The vampire bride straightened herself and hurried away, steps whispering over the stones. Shaltia made her way through the rooms of the Adiposia chamber, brushing aside the chiffon veils draped from the ceiling. Upon reaching its central area, she found 3 vampire brides awaiting her.
Shall we draw a bath, Shaltia Summer?
No, we've only a few minutes. The vampire brides immediately moved to attend to her, falling into the routines and habits instilled into them. They were her handmaidens, her soldiers, and her concubines, though she hadn't had the time to play with them recently. Most of them were away, taking turns working at and around the various posts of the new aerial transportation network, while others functioned as administrators who coordinated and compiled all of the information coming in to create a comprehensive overview of the logistical needs of the Sorceress Kingdom, as well as that of the territories using their services. Even the 3 who were now fussing over her appearance had experience in assisting her with her paperwork. As much as she would have liked to, she couldn't toy with them as she did before. They were pop mobs that would respawn after a short period of time if they died as a result of her tender attentions, but they would not remember anything that they had learned. In her zeal to serve Iron Summer, she had thrown all of her resources into getting the transportation network up and running, so she had to restrain her urges for the time being. Once she felt that things had stabilized and were well on their way, she could set aside a few for her personal use and return to her customary pleasures. Is everything to your satisfaction, Shaltia Summer? She turned her attention from her thoughts to the vampire bride holding a body-length mirror before her. Bathed in the sultry light of the chamber, her reflection looked back at her, adorned in her black ballroom gown. She took a turn, inspecting every detail closely. It should be sufficient, given the nature of this meeting, Shaltia nodded. She made her way towards the exit of the chamber. One of her attendants walked ahead to hold the door open for her. Shaltia stopped, her foot hovering over the threshold. Was her appearance actually appropriate? What was the nature of this meeting, exactly? A slight frown marred her face. Emergency meeting. Throne room. Several irregularities stood out to her already. Most of Albedo's meetings were now held in Irantal, as the lion's share of their work now revolved around administrating matters involving the Sorcerer's Kingdom. If the meeting was in the throne room, it should be some business regarding Nazarick, either that, or it was something the Prime Minister wished to discuss behind closed doors, so to speak. Then there was the possibility that Iron Summer would be there. Many matters concerning the governance of the realm obviously did not require the Supreme One's direct attention, and so he did not grace the vast majority of their sessions with his presence. Albedo could have very well requested that Iron Summer attend, as it was an emergency meeting. Was her appearance suitable for an audience with Iron Summer? No, nothing could be good enough for her beloved. Maybe she should take that bath, also a manicure. Was her hair really okay? Her hesitation grew as she fell deeper into her grave thoughts. No, wait, this was a trap. If she took the time to make suitable preparations, she would be berated for being late to an emergency meeting regardless of whether Iron Summer was there or not. If she came as she was, her appearance would be drastically inferior to Albedo's, who had foreknowledge of the meeting and would have made the appropriate preparations. Shaltia Summer? Hold on, I'm thinking. She was already caught in Albedo's schemes. Was there some other way to save face? Since it was an emergency meeting, she could go in fully armed and equipped, shifting the focus to an image of readiness. No, that wouldn't work. The content of the message conveyed the idea that there were no immediate threats, so joining the meeting in such an appearance would indicate that she was incapable of gauging the situation. Albedo had sealed away her only avenue of escape as well. There was no choice but to advance into whatever traps were laid out for her. Stepping across the threshold, she crossed the bridge into the catacombs and turned up the corridor towards the nearest teleportation gate. Usually a trap when Nazarick was under threat of intrusion, it was reconfigured by Auriel Omega to serve as a way for Shiltir and her vassals to easily access the inner portions of Nazarick from her home far closer to the surface. She stepped onto the tile, and the dark catacombs of the upper floor were replaced by the antechamber of the throne room. The great doors were open. She noted that the vassals of several of the other floor guardians were waiting to the side of the entryway. She waved her own attendants away to join them, making her way past the towering doors and into the highest hall of the Supreme Beings. Shiltir lowered her head respectfully as she crossed under the 40 banners along the way. At the base of the stairs leading up to the Throne of Kings, a number of figures had already assembled. Some, she had expected due to their vassals being stationed in the vestibule, Cocytus, Aura, and Mare. As Demiurge's vassals were not present, it was not a surprise that he was absent. In addition to the floor guardians gathered, Sabos, Pandora's actor, and Nabril Gamma stood in their places amongst them. Unexpectedly, Yuri Alpha and Pestonia were there as well. Shiltir completed her approach to stand in her position as the floor guardian of the first, second, and third floors, pondering the strange combination of attendees for this emergency meeting. A few moments following her arrival, Albedo stepped forward from where she stood beside the throne and Shiltir inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. Summer doesn't appear to be attending. A large part of her was disappointed that she couldn't see him, but she did not want to appear before him when she was at such a disadvantage. The Guardian Overseer's gaze swept over those assembled, and Shiltir thought she saw Albedo smirk as their eyes briefly met. Everything was on purpose. An unpleasant scowl grew on Shiltir's face as the realization dawned upon her. Albedo appeared to be fully groomed and ready to receive Summer. She was silently declaring her superiority over her, toying with her feelings and lack of control over the entire situation. Shiltir opened her mouth angrily. "So, what's this emergency?" Aura's voice came loudly from beside her before she could say anything. The dark elf had a frown on her face, one that silently spoke on everyone's behalf. Why had they been called away from the important duties that Summer had assigned to them? "An untenable situation has arisen in Iranthal," Albedo replied. "One that needs to be resolved as quickly as possible." The NPCs stirred at the statement, various expressions painting their faces. "Is it rebellion?" Cocytus spoke first, a blast of cold air punctuating his words. "I have neither heard nor witnessed any signs of such," Pandora's actor said. Shiltir looked back and forth as the others confirmed the doppelganger's words. "The adventurers are focused entirely on training," Mare said. "They don't seem unhappy either, even when they die once in a while." "The demi-human quarter is at peace as well," Yuri Alpha added, "as far as I could tell from the orphanage. Perhaps Negredo Summer would be more useful here?" The Adventurer Guild and the Demi-Human Quarter were where the most powerful members of Iranthal's citizenry were concentrated, making them potential locations for dissidents to appear. "Is it the temple's Aransuka?" Shiltir ventured. "Summer has instructed us to not interfere in their matters unless they disrupt the peace of the city. The so-called Faith of the Four is slowly crumbling away with their impotence in full display. Are they finally beginning to flail in desperation?" Putting down a religion that took such a vehement stance against the undead was a delicious prospect. Imaginings of the devastation and suffering she would render against them started to fill her mind. "No, it appears that Summer's measures in regards to the temples are playing out perfectly," Albedo replied. "The problem the city is experiencing stems from a rumor." The NPCs exchanged glances in confusion. Why had an emergency meeting been called over a rumor? The city was at peace. Trade had returned and the implementation of Summer's mandates were going as smoothly as could be expected. Perhaps the Guardian Overseer was simply imagining nails that needed to be hammered down. "If it's a rumor," Shiltir replied, "then I suppose we should go out and collect some tongues." "It's far too late for that," Albedo told her. "The problem has become widespread. Rather than having us imagine some vague threat, Perhaps you should provide the specific details of this rumor.
That's right, Aura agreed with Pandora's actor. Without a target, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be tracking.
I concur, Sebastian added. Perhaps we have heard it in passing. With some details, we should be able to piece together something between us. The source could be entirely benign. It dawned upon Shiltir that all of those present had a significant presence in the city, either through their subordinates or by being there directly. The NPCs awaited the Guardian Overseer's answer.
This rumor is one that affects our future relationship with the dwarves, Albedo said. Something that undermines the citizens' confidence over whether commercial activity can be conducted safely. Several petitions have filtered to my desk through various avenues about the frost giants in the Azalisia Mountains and the threat that they represent to our commerce.